project management students. Today we're going to be talking about one of the more crucial operational areas of project management, which is procurement management. In other words, how do we get goods and services that we need to be able to complete our project? This is a very functional area, and it's something, when I say we do a cursory look at it, keep in mind there are people who spend their entire careers working in procurement. So it's a very specialized discipline, and one that's changing rapidly thanks to the influx of new technologies. So what are our objectives? Our objectives are really to give you a very basic overview of what procurement is all about, how basic contracts work, and why it's so important for project management and IT project management specifically. We're also going to be talking about the implications of procurement management in agile and adaptable environments as well. So why is it so important? When we talk about procurement, we're also talking about acquiring goods and services. This term also sometimes gets associated with outsourcing. A term we also hear applied to here is purchasing as well. If you're in a large organization, you may have a purchasing office. You may be dealing with somebody who does this as their full-time job, or a team of people who do this as their full-time job, or you may be doing it yourself. If you get into companies, large companies like Walmart handle all this in-house, where small companies maybe outsource some of these processes as well. And some companies are even making the choice now to outsource less of their work. For example, why is GM and Ford and all these big major companies, auto companies, why are they insourcing rather than outsourcing their IT work? I think part of the answer is that their business, in terms of their core business, is no longer limited to automobiles. Their core business and their product differentiators are really things like information technology. In other words, Bill Ford, the CEO from Ford, has repeatedly said Ford is no longer a car company. Ford is a technology company that sells cars, and that all companies in the 21st century ultimately are technology companies. So some of the global issues. In recent years, there's been a push to bring back more jobs to the United States. This has been done with things such as tax incentives, federal incentives to bring work back into maybe depressed areas. It's been working pretty well. I mean, our unemployment rate speaks for itself, that we're now looking at 4% unemployment nationally, down from highs of 10 and 11% during the most recent recession. And so we are looking at ways to bring more employment back. The challenge is that when we take purchasing and development and product work back to the United States, we're paying higher wages than other nations do. So it is more expensive ultimately to develop some things in-house. So in terms of why we would want to think about bringing processes in-house, whether it's purchasing or development, sometimes processes are so specific to an organization it can be very difficult to purchase a product off the shelf or to rely on a vendor to do the work for us. For example, if you're in the United States military, some of the systems are so complex in terms of the grants and bid requirements that it doesn't make any sense to try to shoehorn a commercial system. Conversely, if you have a very simple or limited type of purchasing or acquisition system, something off the shelf may work completely well for you. So why would we potentially outsource procurement management? Well, part of it might be you don't need somebody to do procurement all the time. If you're buying hardware and software, it fits and starts in limited quantities, maybe it makes perfect sense to have somebody do that outside of your organization. Another part of procurement management also are outsourcing things that maybe are not part of your core business. Plenty of businesses outsource accounting or, for example, human resource management, so that somebody else who's skilled in the art can be doing that work as opposed to training somebody in-house. We can mitigate our expenses that way as well. And in addition, when you're paying somebody external to your organization, sometimes you can hold them to a higher standard. You can hold them to account for the work they're doing because you're paying them a flat rate or under a contract to do so. So, ironically, some of the principles of procurement management also could affect how we get procurement management contracts. So, in terms of managing procurement, one of the biggest problems we run into is even automated systems occasionally can have problems. We can end up losing money because of systems that are not designed properly. And when we're getting into procurement, as long as human beings are involved, corruption can also be a part of this as well. So if you've got somebody, for example, who is doing bids, is taking bids for contract work, and is showing favoritism to a particular vendor, you may have other issues as well. So project procurement management means that we're getting goods and services from other groups to be able to continue the work we're doing on a particular project. Whether you're buying supplies, you're outsourcing for code or for particular services, we're still using procurement. Our main processes are planning, conducting, and controlling procurements. We're dealing a lot with contracts. So some great examples in terms of how this works in terms of the inputs. The project charter is going to be part of our plan. We know, for example, what the project is about, and the project management plan is going to determine where we need to actually buy these things. Expert judgment applies in almost all of these areas as a tool and technique, because people who are skilled in the art of doing ethical and well-documented bid processes could be part of your entire process. And your outputs ultimately in the procurement management side of things, the planning side of things, are to come up with the process. The outputs and conducting procurement are to make sure that you've got the right sellers, the people who are actually going to be supplying you. And controlling means that you are controlling how these purchasing arrangements are taking shape, closing out contracts, making sure that what was supposed to be delivered gets delivered. So in terms of planning procurement management, it means basically we're deciding what to buy and how. So when do we have a make or buy decision? What we mean by that is we have to make a decision at some point if it makes sense to outsource, to buy a product from someone else, or to develop that product or provide that service ourselves. If it's a one-time thing, for example, it may make perfect sense to continue to buy from a subcontractor when you need a particular item or service. If you have an ongoing need, you may want to integrate. For example, if you get into groups like Walmart, their integration with their vendors is so seamless, it's hard to tell where Walmart ends and where their vendors begin. Conversely, you may have needs that are so sporadic it would make no sense for you to make something inside your organization, as in software or hardware. So what kinds of contracts might we get involved in? We have what we refer to as a fixed price or lump sum contract. And that means that you're paying a fixed price or a lump sum for a particular service. These are wonderful in terms of the customer. If we're asking for a fixed price or lump sum contract, it's wonderful for us that we can say this is what the contract is going to cost. It can sometimes be dangerous if you're the company getting these kinds of contracts, because you've got to make sure that you've got well-defined deliverables. Otherwise, you might find yourself in a situation where you've got a customer asking for unreasonable things that you simply cannot deliver for the price you promised. You also have a concept you need to deal with in these types of contracts called the PTA, the point of total assumption. And that means if the contractor does not deliver what they said they would for the price they said they would, the contractor at that point starts assuming costs and losing money. So if I told you I would clean your sidewalks on your campus for $50 a week, and we get a massive snowstorm, and I had to pay subcontractors to deliver what I promised on, I'm losing $150 a week as the contractor. If I did not have a well-written contract, I have no choice but to lose the money or be in violation of contract. This is what contracts are so important. Then we refer to as cost reimbursable contracts, and that means basically if you're buying from someone, they are buying components for you, and they are providing basically these products or services to you, and you're also providing them with an incentive fee, a cost plus fixed fee, or a cost plus percentage of cost type approach. A cost plus incentive fee means that you're giving incentives for getting work done early. So, for example, if I were selling you a series of laptop computers, if I were the vendor and you were the customer, and per computer, if I deliver it early, I can charge you an extra 50 cents, that would be an incentive fee. A cost plus a fixed fee means I have a built-in stipend that I build in. So, for example, I'm building in some profit. And then a cost plus percentage of costs, meaning I would take, if I had a $100,000 contract and I delivered on time and on schedule, I might get a 10% cost. 10% cost plus percentage would mean I get an extra $10,000. So those are cost reimbursable contracts. Time and materials means that you're basically paying somebody for the time they're working and the costs that they're putting in. So cost reimbursable means that you're going more in covering personnel costs or other costs in the form of fees or percentages. Time and materials means you're billing somebody specifically for the hours you work plus the materials. And then we have what we refer to as unit price contracts, and that might be an example. I will clean this building for this many dollars a month. So that would be a unit price contract. So if I've got 6 buildings to clean, it's going to cost you 6 times what one building would cost, as opposed to just giving a blanket fixed price or lump sum contract. So in terms of the amount of risk, you can see with the buyer and the seller get opposite layers of risk. A cost plus percentage of costs is high risk for the buyer, but low risk for the seller, where a firm fixed price contract, if you're the seller, you're taking on a lot of potential risk. So it's something that most sellers don't want to get involved in. So again, contract incentives. If you're giving contract incentives to your vendors, you're basically giving them a reason to deliver on time and on schedule, or even ahead of time or ahead of schedule by offering bonuses. Let it just be said that most vendors can be very heavily motivated by money. So that's the reason we use contractors in the first place, to get work done that we maybe cannot do ourselves or choose not to do. And we want to make sure that we're maintaining a schedule we can live with by using these contractors. So, if you are smart, you're going to put in clauses in your contracts that will protect you as the buyer. For example, time and material contracts, you want to have clauses in there that give you ways out. For example, a termination clause. If the buyer and seller agree within 30 days, they can end the contract. If you are bleeding money because you have got a firm fixed price contract, hopefully you've put a clause in there that at least says you can end the contract or renegotiate it upon substantial changes to the conditions of employment. Many groups have gone out of business for not being able to live up to the terms of their own contract. I actually remember years ago I was working with an internet service provider, a wireless internet service provider, that every time I turned around was having outages. This was for a major technology grant I was working on. They had given us an unbelievable price to be able to get really great quality of service. And as the old adage goes, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. It certainly was in this case. The individual company kept on rewarding me, and reward in quotes, with additional months of free service. But ultimately, what was that worth when the service itself was no good? So the lesson I learned there was to be as specific as possible with contract language. Thankfully, we did have a service level requirement in terms of the level of service we were to be provided. And when it was time to play hardball, we were able to terminate the contract. So in terms of tools for planning procurement management, a make or buy analysis basically means we're coming up with a term or a way to determine if we should purchase services from a contractor or do it in-house ourselves. And there are lots of ways to do that. Basically, do you have the expertise? Do you have the time to develop the internal expertise? Or there's a hybrid of the two. You might buy the expertise the first time and have your own staff working with a contractor to learn how to do this task in the long run. Expert judgment, you can use it from within your organization, or you can pay for it if you've got a contractor who can bring new skills to bear that maybe you don't have. Market research means that we are getting out there and looking at potential areas where we can either buy or sell product or services to be able to make sure that we are keeping ourselves in the loop. Our project management plan basically should tell us through things like work breakdown structures when we're going to need particular services. And again, it depends on what the project actually needs. Your work breakdown structure should be the source for a lot of the things that you would need to procure or obtain. So what's a statement of work? If you're getting involved in a contract or a subcontract, the statement of work basically is telling us how we want the work to go forward. So if you've got a particular, that's for a particular part of a project, then we call it a contract statement of work. If we've got a statement of work that we're using for an entire project, we might call it a contract SOW, for example. A statement of work gives people who might be interested in working for you a pretty good idea of what it is you're looking for. Are you looking for code development? Are you looking for software development? Are you looking for hardware development? What would vendors who would bid on this particular project be expected to do? So here's a pretty good example of a statement of work. It tells the scope of the project, where it will be done, how long. It's kind of like a miniature version of a project management plan because it really details what the project entails. So in terms of getting bids or proposals, we have something called the RFP, the Request for Proposals, which means we want to buy a product or service. We want to make sure we're getting a good deal, and we're making vendors compete for our business. So we come up with a request for proposals. We request people to be able to give us their best guesses or best efforts at solving our problem or giving us solutions to our needs. We could go then to a request for quotations, which means we're asking people to give us bids. A couple of points here. A request for proposals can contain a request for bids or not. If you're requesting proposals, you may not be evaluating just on cost. If you are evaluating on cost, you can put the request for bids in the proposal, in the request for proposal, or separately. Generally speaking, a good sound business practice, an ethical practice, is to require for blind bids. And that means, for example, you have companies submitting bids that are sealed, whether they are digitally sealed and encrypted, or they're literally handing you an envelope so that you can evaluate them all at the same time, and that there's no chance for somebody to have seen the bids to provide feedback. For example, if you and I were bidding on the same contract, and I was able to see your contract before, or your bid before I submitted my bid, I had a chance to be unfairly competitive. So that's why we want this process to be confidential. So in terms of a request for proposal, sometimes government agencies, in fact, government is very famous for having very detailed and laborious bid processes. Our text gives some great examples of these as well. The bottom line is the more clearly you as the buyer can define what it is you're asking for, the better chance you're going to get a bid that works for you. So in terms of how we decide who we're going to buy from, you need to have evaluation criteria. How are you going to score these? Are you going to weight particular areas of the bid? Are you going to weight price versus service versus whatever? You can put any kind of criteria you want. For example, a lot of really smart companies don't evaluate simply just on price. A lot of companies in the past have gotten into hot water by quoting unrealistically low prices. I won't name the communications provider, but in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, a particular communications provider paid a lot of money in fines for over-promising and under-delivering on a contract. They proposed unrealistically low prices to be able to get a bid and ended up bulking up the price of the contract and change orders. That's why you don't just score people on price. You score them on other reasons as well. If something looks great on paper and it's too good to be true, again, it probably is. So think about it before you sign on the dotted line. I think it's also good if you've got a proposal, if you have the option in your schedule to require people to do presentations. Why not have people come in and answer questions for you? Also, sometimes people or companies who are submitting bids will put on additional value-added types of criteria as well. You want to maybe have some openness to consider ideas maybe you hadn't even considered when you created the request for proposal. So in terms of actually conducting procurement, after we've set how we're going to do this, we have to decide who we're going to invite in to submit bids and give them the documentation they're actually bidding against. Get the proposals, decide who's doing the work, and award the contract. So we can advertise in trade journals. We can directly approach potential vendors and ask them to submit bids. There's lots of ways we can do this. I think a bidders conference is a smart thing to do. And in purchasing speak, what a bidders conference is you essentially get the folks who potentially could be doing the work all together in one room or online and have them discuss it. That way everybody gets the option of asking questions in an open forum, and nobody's getting an unfair advantage in terms of information that maybe all parties didn't have. Bid proposals or bid conferences are a very ethical and sound way to do business. It keeps everything, as we say, above board. So, for example, we talked about weighted scoring models for selecting projects. We can use weighted scoring models, for example, for selecting bidders as well. In this case, for example, we put a disproportionate amount of weight on the technical approach the vendor was taking, more so than price. I think oftentimes that's a very sound approach. So, something to consider whenever you're conducting procurements. So, when we select the seller or the vendor we're going to work with, we may actually even ask for a second proposal. So we might inform the sellers, look, you did great. We were very impressed with your work. We were very impressed with several of you. And now we're asking for a second pass, or what we refer to as a best and final offer, to get a chance to get the best possible deal and best services. Bidders who know they're competing against each other may be perfectly willing to do so. So in terms of controlling procurements, once we've selected the seller, we put contracts in place. And it's important that we have detailed contracts. And when you want to talk risk management from one of our previous discussions, the more detail you put into the contract, the more you potentially protect your company. So the old saying in business, there are 3 rules to business. Write it down, write it down, write it down. And the same goes for contracts. If you're going on verbal or oral kinds of contracts, good luck in a court of law backing up what somebody said they would do. Make sure you get it in writing. And I would also say that written change orders are the way to go for both the contractee and the contractor, or the vendor and the buyer as well. So in terms of controlling contract changes, be careful of who in your organization is able to do so, to ask for change requests, because most vendors have something in their contract language that also implies additional costs. So make sure that you know who in your organization has the right to ask for changes, and use the tools and techniques such as a control system, which you're already using for project management anyway. In terms of closing, you should have some sort of procedure to be able to ensure that all the deliverables have been met, that somebody can provide formal acceptance within your organization that basically says to the vendor, yes, you have satisfied the terms of the contract, and to have detailed criteria enough to be able to say mutually the work is done. Many people have gotten in trouble over the years for not properly closing out a contract or not realizing the deliverables that were left undone. So in terms of procurement itself, I think it makes sense to document everything you do. It's always good to get lots of outside expertise in terms of potential vendors, for example. But I also think it's good to include your own project team in the process. Just because you are a manager or even the project manager doesn't mean you know all the best potential vendors in a particular area. So it makes sense to include your project team as well, and to have a team of folks to help you evaluate these contracts. Oftentimes, the people with the authority to approve changes, for example, aren't the most knowledgeable people on the subject matter as well. So in terms of controlling procurement, I think it's always good at the end of a purchasing session to document what you've learned, to have some sort of documentation for the seller and the buyer that the contract has come to a close, and also document any issues you may have had for future contracts as well. Learn what you should have put in that contract and put it into the next contract, for example. And again, project management software, whether we're using e-procurement and databases to be able to directly purchase from suppliers like companies like Walmart do, or we're simply using our project management software to create work breakdown structures that show where our purchasing needs to take place, we can make very good use of these products to be able to control such procurements. I think it's also good to consider the money and time that can be saved the better that you integrate with e-procurement type systems. It's 2019. Why is your company still writing checks? So one of the things to consider if you're in the agile environment, what it really comes down to is you're going to be procuring things more quickly and more frequently. Doesn't mean these processes don't need to happen in terms of bids and confidentiality and accountability. It just means they're going to be happening probably more quickly. So procurement is as much an art as a discipline, and it's something that takes time to get good at. Don't be afraid to pull additional people from your team into these processes and to protect your company by having well-written contracts with good exit strategies. Guys, thanks so much for your time and attention. I wish you a great day and happy procuring.